John Roberts finishes live shot. Hallie, you guys wrapped up? Good afternoon. As you all know, the Constitution states that the President shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. With that in mind, we're pleased to announce that the President has accepted the Speaker's invitation to deliver the State of the Union address on January 30th. As you all know, the holiday season is in full swing here at the White House, with Thanksgiving having just passed and Christmas on the horizon. We've also just survived Black Friday and Cyber Monday, the biggest shopping days of the year. But right in the middle of all of this is another important day that deserves attention. Earlier this week was the 6th annual Giving Tuesday. Giving Tuesday was created in 2012 to celebrate and support philanthropy. It's a great reminder each year that we have the opportunity and the duty to give back to the people, the institutions, to the country that have given us all so much. As the Gospel of Luke says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Americans understand this. Year after year, the United States ranks at or near the top of the World Giving Index, which ranks countries according to how charitable their people are. In a statement earlier this week, the President encouraged people all over the country to open up their hearts and their pocketbooks to support worthy causes. This Giving Tuesday, he said, I thank those who have contributed to charitable organizations, including our houses of worship, and ask that we continue to come together to give and help others in need, especially to communities devastated by the recent natural disasters. Together, we can ensure that the blessings of this holiday season are shared around the world. The President is leading by example on this. As you're aware, he donates his full presidential salary on a quarterly basis. He donated his first quarter salary to fund restoration projects at the National Battlefield. In the second quarter, he donated his salary to the Department of Education so they could host science, technology, engineering, and math camps for children. And today, I have Acting Secretary Hargan from HHS to make an announcement regarding what the President will be doing with his third quarter salary. So with that, I'd like to bring up the Acting Secretary. And before I wrap up, I just want to say how much we look forward to hosting everybody tomorrow. And I will be back up after the Acting Secretary makes remarks about what the donation is for to take questions on other topics. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Acting Secretary and be back up. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Sarah. So thank you, Sarah, for that, and good afternoon, everyone. As Sarah said, I'm the Acting Secretary at the Department of Health and Human Services, known as HHS. HHS is home not just to programs like Medicare and Medicaid, but also to the National Institutes of Health, NIH, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, known as CDC, Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the federal government's Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency, known as SAMHSA. That's a lot of acronyms, so sorry about that. But I want you to know what HHS does because I'm here to talk about the check that I was just given, written by President Trump to HHS using his third quarter salary. His decision to donate his salary is a tribute to his compassion, to his patriotism, and his sense of duty to the American people. But it's his compassion, above all, that drives his interest in the issue to which HHS is going to devote his donation, America's devastating opioid crisis. Since day one of this administration, President Trump's leadership on this issue has driven action on it across the federal government. Speaking for HHS in particular, earlier this year, we unveiled a comprehensive strategy that attacks the opioid epidemic on 5 fronts. The 5 points are better data on the epidemic, better research into pain and addiction, better pain management, better targeting of overdose reversing drugs, and better prevention, treatment, and recovery services. This strategy devotes HHS's unique resources and expertise to empowering heroes on the front lines of this crisis. Because, after all, it's our local partners in community clinics, churches, law enforcement, schools, and state, local, and tribal governments who ultimately are going to turn the tide on this epidemic. They are fighting each day, face-to-face with a drug crisis that is killing more than 175 Americans every day. Now just think about that for a second. That means we'll lose 7 of our fellow Americans to drug overdoses during this press briefing alone. That kind of urgency is why President Trump delivered a speech back in October calling for HHS to declare an unprecedented nationwide public health emergency regarding the crisis. After we did so, we've continued to take aggressive action at our department, including approving state waivers to expand addiction treatment and clarifying that doctors and hospitals can share information with the patient's loved ones in dangerous situations like drug overdoses. Now, I got to meet some of the local heroes that we're working to empower just a few weeks ago when I traveled to Kentucky the day after the president's speech. We visited a clinic in Lexington that treats young mothers struggling with opioid addiction and their babies who are sometimes born physically dependent on opioids themselves. The stories we heard in Lexington hit close to home for me personally because I'm from a small town in southern Illinois, the kind of rural community that's been hit hard by this epidemic. It's also the kind of community that President Trump has spent a lot of time in over the past couple of years, where he's heard about how Americans are suffering. Part of the way we aim to stop this crisis is by raising awareness of how devastating and deadly drug addiction can be. That's why we're so pleased that President Trump has chosen to donate his salary this quarter to the planning and design of a large-scale public awareness campaign about the dangers of opioid addiction. And HHS is proud to be working with the White House on this effort. And our team of public health experts brings a great deal of experience and expertise to the table regarding how to make these campaigns effective. At HHS, our goal is to create healthier lives, stronger communities, and a safer country. And we're glad to have a president who recognizes that the opioid crisis is a huge threat to all three of these goals. The president is personally dedicated to defeating this crisis because addiction hits home for so many of us. You heard him share the story in his opioid speech about how he lost his own brother to alcoholism. And speaking personally, opioid addiction has been a presence in my hometown and my family for years. It was years ago, in fact, that I lost a close relative who constantly struggled with opioids. So this Christmas and holiday season, all of us should consider following the president's example and think about what we can do in our own private lives to help fight back against a crisis that's tearing American families apart. We all know people who are hurting this holiday season, and I know that we as Americans will rise to their aid. So thanks again for having me here today, and thanks once again to President Trump for his generous donation. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Acting Secretary Hargan. Appreciate you being here today on behalf of the department.
You got a cold there, Sarah?
I actually have strep throat, so if you guys will bear with me a little bit, I may sneak a sip of water here. Thank you for your concern. And I may not stay as long as normal, but I'm going to do the best I can. And Steve, we'll start with you on questions.
Thank you. With all these reports about Secretary Tillerson today, could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the President and the Secretary? Does the President have confidence in him? And does the President agree with all of the positions that the Secretary has taken regarding North Korea, the Gulf crisis, etc.?
Look, as we've said many times before, as many of you love to write these type of stories, when the president loses confidence in someone, they will no longer serve in the capacity that they're in. The president was here today with the Secretary of State. They engaged in a foreign leader visit and are continuing to work together to close out what we've seen to be an incredible year. Cecilia?
Can we deduce from that that the president has confidence in the Secretary of State?
I think I addressed that pretty clearly just now.
Is that a yes?
As I just said, and as we've said many times before, when it comes to questions like this of senior staff and cabinet secretaries, when the president loses confidence in somebody, they'll no longer be here. As the president said on the record, and several of you were in the room in the Oval today, the Secretary of State is here, and we're working hard to get big things accomplished and close out what's already been a very strong and positive year.
What's
Matthew?
his future in the administration?
I'm sorry?
What's his future in the administration?
I think his future right now is to continue working hard as the Secretary of State, continue working with the President to carry out his agenda. Matthew?
Thanks. A question on taxes. The Joint Committee on Taxation says that by 2027, people making between $40,000 and $50,000 a year will pay a combined $5.3 billion more in taxes under the current bill, while those earning $1 million or more will pay $5.8 billion less. And coupled with that, the University of Chicago surveyed 38 economists. Only one said that the bill would lead to substantial economic growth, and all 38 said that the cut will increase the debt. Is it the White House position that these analyses are wrong?
I can't speak to that specific report because I haven't had a chance to look at it and talk to the economic team here. What I can tell you is what I've said every single day that we've been part of this process. The president laid out his priorities. We feel like the plans as of right now from the House and Senate meet those priorities of cutting taxes for the middle class, simplifying the tax code, bringing business back home. Those have been the big focus of the administration. Those are going to be the things we continue to fight for as we go through this tax policy.
So, the
Steve?
JCT, nonpartisan, their analysis seems to say middle class taxes would actually go up in a lot of cases.
There are several studies that say the opposite.
Does the Treasury have data that would contradict that?
Yeah, and there have been several studies that say that this is a good thing for the middle class. I saw one just yesterday. We'll send it to you after the briefing concludes. But again, we're going to continue fighting for this and making sure that the middle class does receive tax cuts that they deserve and frankly that they need. And we think that we're making a lot of progress on this front, and we think that we're going to get it done by the end of the year. Steve?
Based on Ambassador Haley's speech yesterday at the UN and the president's tweet this morning, does this administration now advocate regime change in North Korea? And if not, why not?
This administration is focused on one big thing when it comes to North Korea, and that's denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That's our number one priority. That's what we're focused on. Anything beyond that is not the priority at this point. Jill?
Sarah, I want to ask about the video that the president tweeted yesterday. Firstly, does the president feel that he has an obligation to ensure that the information that he shares on his Twitter feed to millions of people is accurate?
I think the president feels that bringing up important issues of our time, like extreme violence and terrorism, are important to do. That was what he was doing in that process, and I think he's going to continue to do that in a number of venues, whether it's through speeches, whether it's through Twitter or other social media platforms.
Does he understand, though, that sharing those videos might incite violence against Muslims? And does he understand that he's elevated a fringe political group that many people outside of Britain didn't even know about until...
Look, I think what he's done is elevate the conversation to talk about a real issue and a real threat, and that's extreme violence and extreme terrorism, something that we know to be very real and something the president feels strongly about talking about and bringing up and making sure is an issue every single day, that we're looking at the best ways to protect Americans. John?
On that point, Sarah, did the president, when he retweeted Jada Franken, know who she was?
No, I don't believe so. But I think he knew what the issues are, and that is that we have a real threat of extreme violence and terrorism, not just in this country, but across the globe, particularly in Europe. And that was the point he was making. And I don't really have much to add beyond that. Alex?
Sarah. Yesterday, the president tweeted that NBC should terminate Joe Scarborough because of a, quote, unsolved mystery that took place in Florida years ago. Why did President Trump think it was appropriate to seemingly reference the death of Lori Klaustis in 2001? And does he think Scarborough is responsible for the death of his former aide?
I don't have anything to add on that front beyond the tweet. April?
Sarah, a couple things. One, what was the tipping point between President Trump and Tillerson?
Like I said, I don't believe there was a tipping point, considering they were sitting here in a meeting today working hard to carry out the president's agenda. I think the tipping point is trying to do the best they can to make sure that they're making our world a better place, making America safer, and they're working together to get that done.
Is the president listening to Tillerson as it relates to North Korea, as North Korea is escalating?
The president's listening to the Secretary of State as well as the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, his Chief of Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a number of other individuals, including world leaders that he's spoken to several times this week, specifically about North Korea, and he's going to continue to do that and continue to talk to all of the relevant stakeholders. April, I'm going to keep moving.
What about John Conyers? He's in the hospital, and there's a call for him to resign. What does the president have to say about that?
That's a decision for John Conyers to make. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Back to Tillerson, where does the administration think these stories are coming from? Is it difficult, in your view, for Mr. Tillerson to carry out his job as Secretary of State with all of these questions surrounding whether or not he's going to be in the administration maybe through January of next year?
Look, I don't know where those stories are coming from. I don't try to spend most of my day figuring that out. I'd rather focus on the points that I know and the points that we're driving through the administration. And the Secretary of State's a pretty tough guy. I think he'll be just fine carrying his job out. Blake?
Sarah, we often hear the president or see the president talk about the stock market. We haven't yet heard from him, though, on a separate but similar issue, which is cryptocurrency. Has the president been following this at all? Bitcoin specifically, the major run-up in it. Does he have an opinion on it? Does he feel, or does the administration feel that this is now something that needs to be regulated by the government?
I know this is something that is being monitored by our team here in terms of specific briefings and announcements on it. I don't have anything that I can share with you right now, but we'll be happy to follow back up with you. I'm sorry?
What kind of monitoring?
Look, this is an issue. I know that Tom Bossert with the Homeland Security team and advisor to the president has brought this up in a meeting earlier this week. I know it's something that he's keeping an eye on. We'll keep you posted when we have anything further on it. Stephen.
Sarah, I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. Actually, I hope you feel better. I have a question about the president's health. Mr. Trump's predecessors, going back, I've checked as far as Ronald Reagan. Every year would go up to Bethesda to be looked at by the best doctors in the military, and they would report on their health and the vital statistics to the American public. We have a month left in the year. Does President Trump intend to get a physical at Walter Reed?
I'd have to ask. That's not something I've checked on, but I'd be happy to check on it.
Do you know if the president intends to share any details about his health, the way his predecessors have?
Well, like I said, I haven't asked him that, but I'd be happy to check. I do know that I spent 12 days on the road with him in Asia, and despite the fact that he's a little bit older than me, he had twice the energy that I do, and I'm the one sick now, and he's still going. So I think he's in pretty good health, but I'll be happy to share any information. Tolu?
Thank you, Sarah. You read the verse from Luke earlier about how to those who are given much, much is expected. Linking that to tax policy, the president said yesterday that this tax bill is going to cost him a fortune. Independent analysis says that that's not true, that he's actually going to save a lot of money and his family could save more than $1 billion. So can you tell us specifically what in the bill is going to cause the president to pay more in taxes than he's paying now?
Yeah, I think some of the provisions in the bill, which may or may not be there, we'll see what the final piece of legislation looks like, but a lot of the deductions that he would probably normally receive may not be part of the package that would affect his actual what he pays in taxes. But again, until there's a final piece of legislation, I can't go into much more detail, but I know that some versions of it take out a lot of those deductions that currently benefit the president and his family. Take one last question here.
What's the president's response to the stiff review?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go right here.
The president was pretty definitive yesterday when he said he would pay more, that his wealthy friends would pay more. So what was he referring to?
Well, like I just said, I believe his reference was to a lot of the deductions that may no longer exist that are in the current policy right now. Again, we'll have to see what the final piece of legislation looks like. Our focus as an administration has been to focus on middle-class tax cuts. That's why I think the president doesn't care whether or not he gets a tax cut or not, but his focus is on making sure that the middle class and middle-class families get those tax cuts, that we simplify the process, and that we bring companies back home so that they can invest here. Margaret, I'll take one more question. Sorry.
You repeatedly said that Tillerson will help to close out a successful year. Are you saying that he will close out the year? Will he serve beyond that? And when you're talking about elevating the conversation here, does the president normally watch these kind of anti-Muslim videos that have been posted by this group? I mean, is that?
I'm not sure every single video the president has viewed. In terms of the Secretary of State, I think I've spoken about that pretty extensively and answered that question.
Deliberate by you. Were you really mean?
We're all closing out the year. You guys are closing out the year in your news network. We don't set the calendar. That's something that happened a few centuries ago. The year is going to end whether we like it or not. We're all going to close it out, and we're all going to do the very best job we can for the American people in that process. I don't mean anything by it more than that. I'm closing out the year. You guys are. I know most of you are doing end of the year stories because that's how the calendar works. The year ends, and we're going to end on a really strong note, and I think we're going to end the briefing on a strong note, and I'm going to go get some water and a few cough drops. And
Sarah, what about Prime Minister
our team will be around the rest of the afternoon to answer any other questions you guys have. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Those videos before he posts them.
A lesson on how the calendar works from the White House right there. Welcome to the briefing room. I'm ABC News' Rick Klein, joined by John Santucci. You have a Long Island strong edition of the briefing room today. We're going to be joined by our correspondents up on Capitol Hill and over at the White House in a few minutes, but a little under the weather, Sarah Sanders today, addressing a very big story that has to do with the Secretary of State. This breaks in the New York Times earlier today, and ABC News has since confirmed the reporting that there's a transition plan in place to ease Secretary Tillerson. Now, you're out of that job of Secretary of State. You're a veteran Trump watcher. Yeah. Tell us about the tea leaves here. When you see a story like this drop that says Rex Tillerson is headed for the exits, what's that mean?
New York Times, a.k.a. Death Notice. That's sort of what that means to me. I mean, listen, I think that how often we would see during the campaign, when you and I were talking about this before we came on, that, there would be a situation where someone was going to get axed. They wouldn't be told about it by the boss, then the candidate. They would learn about it from a reporter, a news outlet, a tweet maybe, and that was sort of the end of them, right? That really feels like that today. Now, what's interesting, though, in this respect is that you had General John Kelly come out. He doesn't go on the record very often, as you and I both know, comes out and says, oh, there's no plans, everybody's happy, everybody's staying, don't worry. That doesn't really pass the smell test with us. And I think that this is a long, ongoing feud. The president, Rex Tillerson, going back months since he came into the administration, and really a lot of frustration with Tillerson across the board, right? This is a State Department that is still not staffed up. There's a lot of vacancies, not just here in the United States in the State Department, but also abroad in our ambassadorships, on the agencies, that they're not fully at capacity. A lot of frustration across the board with Rex Tillerson.
And if you're listening to what's being said publicly, Sarah Sanders not quite going as far as saying that there's complete confidence. Nope. Even the State Department initially denying that Tillerson is leaving, but then just denying whether there's a transition plan. Right. Couching that a little bit, it does seem like this is beginning to wind down. The message, it would seem to me, and it was a little bit of a strange moment. Our colleague Cecilia Vega was actually in the Oval Office where Rex Tillerson was. Take a listen to that exchange.
Great honor, believe me. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Mr. President, do you want Rex Tillerson on the job, Mr. President?
He's here. Rex is here.
Do you want him to stay in his job?
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
So that's interesting, because Rex was in the building. So
literally
there.
True. Yeah, literally
but no, this idea that, he's here, was somebody he's here in the building or he's here to stay in the administration.
He could have said, he's my guy, I'm sticking with him, don't believe the failing New York Times.
Yep.
He didn't say that.
No, and there hasn't been a tweet since from the president saying about the failing New York Times. So I think it's going to be a while for us to hang on to Rex Tillerson.
We'll get to the tweets in a moment, exactly. But let's talk taxes, because it's a very big day up on Capitol Hill. Ali Rogan is up there, and you've been counting the votes. A big statement today by John McCain, who was on the fence, saying that he is on board. What the next couple hours look like? It looks like things are pretty good right now for the prospects of this passing.
Rick, I can best sum up how the next couple hours are going to go by imitating, you guys all know it, the shruggy emoji. It looks something like this.
Nice. That's a briefing room first.
Did you rehearse that, Ali? That was pretty good, gotta say.
Was it? Because I can't see it, but I hope I left it up long enough so you guys could take pictures and show me later.
We got it.
McCain, you're right, Rick. McCain has come out. After careful consideration, he's going to support this bill. That's a huge boon for Republicans, because his vote has not been a sure thing for a long time. But there are still a lot of Republicans who are citing major concerns about this bill that for any other piece of legislation in any other circumstance, the concerns that they have would have been worked out well in advance, weeks ago, during committee negotiations, during hearings. But they're the kind of major things that should be resolved. But they're going to be voting on it at some point in the next, we think 24 hours, 48 hours. But they're still whipping votes. And guys, it's just really not clear. We just really have no idea when these votes are going to get started.
And Cecilia Vega joining us over at the White House. It wouldn't appear that the president is on the verge of a pretty major legislative victory, but there's a lot of other noise around everything going on in the White House today, including the story about Rex Tillerson. How did you read that exchange with the president that we played just a moment ago?
Well, they want it both ways here. Sarah Sanders, I think, is very carefully choosing her words. She said, by my count, at least twice, that he will help close out a successful year. That's a telltale sign, if you ask me, that come January 1st, Rex Tillerson, or shortly thereafter, may not be a part of this administration. If our reporting and the stories that are out there circulating here in Washington are any indication, But another reporter circled back and asked her again and said essentially, Sarah, wait a second, you're putting a specific timeline here. And Sarah tried to walk back a little bit and said that I don't mean anything by that. There's no timeline. I actually think her words were, there's a calendar that has been in place for hundreds of years, and it is the end of the year, I would like to remind you. So so that happened.
Yeah, well, and also the fact that Donald Trump doesn't make the calendar, Cecilia. That was a very helpful piece of information.
Right, but I do think the fact that we are talking about Rex Tillerson and his status here inside this administration really is no surprise to any of us who've been covering this White House for the past 11 months. This has been being discussed for months and months. I think I was first talking to sources about this over the summer, if I'm not mistaken, a potential list of replacements, Tillerson replacements being vetted that has been going back for months. But, and really the president's own words are indication enough that Rex Tillerson is not in his good graces and has not been for quite some time. There was that very public bashing, cutting him off at the knees, if you will, over his stand on North Korea and negotiating with that country. So this really is no surprise.
And I want to move on to another topic today, which is the president's tweets, and even by Trumpian standards.
Is that a topic today? Why?
Yeah, I got to tell.
We never talk about the president's tweets. What?
Well, you're right. We're going to break format a little bit, Cecilia, just to bring this up.
Just in.
I love that we have a new explanation for the president's tweets today, because Sarah Sanders says that this was an attempt to elevate the conversation. I've just been tallying a couple of these. We
Cecilia's pulling out the whiteboard.
I got a whiteboard.
Brace yourself.
Those anti-Muslim videos, of course, unverified and put out by an extreme group in England. The Joe Scarborough conspiracy theory, the tweets about Matt Lauer and NBC. Little Rocket Man made an appearance, and of course the boycott of CNN and attacks.
Thank God you can read them
on the New York.
Nobody else can.
There it is. So Cecilia, what do you think? Is that elevation of the conversation? Does it feel elevated? It must in the room.
Well, let's also circle back to what we started talking about here, which is tax reform. I mean, and all of these tweets are coming out at a time when this White House wants to control this narrative. They're on the verge of what potentially could be their first legislative victory. They're closer than they've ever been to one right now, and yet the president once again is muddling his own message by his tweets. These tweets that he had yesterday morning, this extremely fringe group from the UK with these absolutely anti-Muslim tweets that the president retweeted is going to be very, very difficult for this White House to walk back from. And frankly, they're not really even trying to. This White House's message, I thought that it would have been the president didn't know what he was tweeting. These were retweets, just a simple click of a button, and therefore they're out there. Actually, they're sort of a phrase that I hate to use, but I'm going to use it. They're doubling down and saying that, in fact, this is a message that the president wants to have out there, that he wants to be discussing national security, and these tweets were a vehicle for him to do that. Certainly, Theresa May strongly disagrees with this. Certainly, the British Parliament strongly disagrees with it. And if there are reports that are out there are any indication, there are great and perhaps very genuine fears that these tweets could endanger people in embassies around the world for sparking anti-Muslim backlash.
Cecilia Vega, we'll let you get back to it. Double down, triple down, whatever you need to do. Go get ready for World News Tonight. Appreciate it, Cecilia.
Talk to you guys maybe tomorrow about more tweets. Who knows?
Let's do it. So, John, what do you make of the tweets? I mean, we cover these tweets all the time, obviously. He says a lot of things. Yeah, okay. If you're not familiar with the show.
Yeah.
But even by those standards, I mean, the way that they've come out in rapid fire, there have been times where he's very quiet and very behaved on Twitter. This is not one of those times.
You know, I think you have to look at the fact that the president right now has a lot of things that are coming in on him, right? He has the tax bill. If he doesn't get that done, it's going to be a complete failure for the year of not getting a single major legislative accomplishment done. That's number one. Number two, as we've been watching very closely, we understand there's going to be more movement before the end of the year in the special counsel's probe related to the Russia investigation. That is something that worries him, right? Because if that comes back on him, his family, the Trump organization, and the campaign, that obviously tarnishes, this idea he's built that, there was no collusion. Obviously, there's no proof yet. Right. But if something comes out, that certainly will be that cloud he's often talked about that will continue to hang over this this White House. I think it's all of those things, right? He feels boxed into a corner, and what do we know about Donald Trump? When he's boxed into that little box, he's going to come swinging, punching, hitting, and he's not going to stop. I do think, though, the last couple of days, what it's shown to me, and someone close to the president made this observation to me just a few minutes ago before he came on the air, was that he was down in Mar-a-Lago, right, enjoying the break. Yeah. He got to see his past life. And now he's back in the White House. And now he's got all of this stuff that maybe he doesn't really want to deal with. And it's just, it's driving him crazy.
Yeah, and you're seeing it play out in real time on that Twitter feed. Want to move on to the drama that's unfolding on Capitol Hill around John Conyers. New revelations have come out. He is now currently hospitalized. His lawyer has spoken this afternoon to say he has no intention of resigning. But Ali Rogan up on the Capitol Hill, the knives have come out for him, and you're seeing Democrats, led by Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic leader, say that he has to go. A major shift since Sunday when she called him an icon, said he had an opportunity. She has now come full circle and said he has to go. What do you think's behind this pressure campaign, and does it go anywhere?
Yeah, well, the floodgates have opened. Why it's happening, I think it's pretty clear. Nancy Pelosi's comments over the weekend, calling Conyers, as you said, an icon, questioning the veracity of the accuser's accounts, that didn't go over well with a lot of people. And it really didn't make the Democratic Party up here look good. So she has done a complete 180, and now that has basically given everybody else cover to start calling for his resignation. But as you mentioned, Conyers and his camp are completely defiant. They're saying absolutely not. He is not stepping down. They want to let the House Ethics Committee process play out. And I think it's actually very interesting, guys, to bring in another scandal sort of across the Capitol that's playing out. Senator Al Franken, more accusers are coming out saying that he touched them inappropriately or kissed them against their will. And it's sort of a different story. It's kind of interesting. Nobody over here has called for him to resign. They're all insisting that the process play out. He is, we believe, under investigation as well. So there's sort of two different narratives playing out here. Obviously, these two men are accused of very different things. But given the fact that this is all sort of the first iterations of sexual harassment on the Hill coming under a new light, it's going to sort of set a precedent for how these things are dealt with in both the House and the Senate.
And I think one of the things you're seeing, Allie, is this frustration with some members of the Democratic Party. I think Kathleen Rice has really dug her heels in on this one. Another Long Islander for us, Rick.
How about that?
But you know, with Rice, Allie, the fact that she walked out of a House leadership meeting just days ago because she said nobody was getting to the point, no one was addressing this. You know, that frustration is really boiling over right now on Capitol Hill for many members.
For many members, but what's interesting, John, is that that's not manifesting itself in actual bills and actual laws being passed to change the culture up here. I would be remiss if I didn't note that the House and Senate have both now passed bills to mandate sexual harassment training for all members of congressional staff. But beyond that, there's not this major push you see for anything else. They could push to make the names known of the accused because the process right now is very opaque. They could disclose, they could make it mandatory to disclose the amount of money that is put into these settlements, but nobody's doing that. So I think the big question going forward is, when does that sea change start happening and more members start calling for additional legislation to be passed to change the culture up here?
And I would note, guys, that one question that was not asked, one name not even mentioned at the briefing today, Roy Moore.
It's a first.
The fact that these other revelations come out, it seems to give the White House a little bit of cover. All right, let's bring things in for a landing here. Allie, any final thoughts today? What did you learn from today's White House briefing?
Well, I learned that I think the White House's perception of this tax bill is a little rosier than that of folks up here. They're still working through a lot of big changes. We could still see a vote as early as tonight, but you know, the plan is always the plan until it's no longer the plan anymore. So I wouldn't hold your breath.
All right. Well, it's going to be a late night for you, so you better not be holding any.
It's going to be a late night for me. A lot of coffee up here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Allie. John, what did you learn today?
The calendar was created a long time ago. A really long time
hundreds of years probably.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
and it's the end of the year. and we should wrap up our year and be done with it.
Well, we can confirm that. It's undeniably true. I am struck by this elevate the conversation thing. I think that's fascinating because it's a little window into how the White House spin. I mean, remember, for months it was the tweet speaks for itself. The tweet speaks for itself. When in this case there was an unverified, in fact, a fraudulent video that was tweeted by the President of the United States that he didn't apparently know that. The point that Sarah Sanders made yesterday and again today is it doesn't really matter whether or not it's an accurate thing because it gives him an opportunity to talk about the issues. That is a sea change in how the presidential oratory or presidential communication is conducted.
Yeah.
If he can just say whatever he wants because it's elevating a conversation.
It's scary.
It is. You imagine the boss watching and liking what he's hearing from this.
He's enjoying it. That was a thumbs up from the audience for one.
There you go. All right, that does it for this edition of the Briefing Room, your special Long Island edition.
Yeah.
You can check us out all day at abcnews.com. Download the ABC News app. World News Tonight has a lot to cover on all of these topics and much, much more. And we'll be back next time with another episode of the Briefing Room.